Right. Hi everybody. This is Unit 2, Lecture 2, Notes 4 through 6. All right. The first day was all about kind of an introduction into ideology, political ideology, American political culture. All right. And so we kind of move on now and get a little deeper understanding. And today we're going to look at public opinion and political socialization. All right. So public opinion is simply what it says, right? It's the idea of what the public thinks about certain issues, all right? And we're not talking like, Kardashian polls or the Orange County housewife or what do they think is the best song of the year. We're talking more about their political opinion on certain issues. For example, it's past now because you're watching this video much later after I recorded it, but what does the American public think about the possible use of American military in Syria as a result of Syria and Bashar al-Assad using chemical weapons, right? And so we can gauge public opinion, all right, and figure out what they think. Now, your notes talk about three types of public opinion: the elites, the attentive, and the masses, right? Those three types of public opinion. The elites are those within our American society that have political resources, meaning they probably have high levels of political efficacy in the sense that they have a big impact on the actual policy or decisions made in government. So these are, of course, our elected officials, economic leaders, media leaders, military leaders, bureaucratic leaders, people that have, their resources can be money, their resources can be knowledge and intellect, their resources can be experience, relationships among people, like social capital can be their resources, right? That those that have a big influence on the system. I mean, senators, congressmen, presidents, secretaries of state, treasury, defense, state senators, state assembly people, lobbyists, that represent various interest groups, that kind of thing, all right? Okay. And these elites help set the national agenda. These elites are actually influencing what policy decisions will be made, all right? So, now, the attentive public opinion is the public opinion of those who feel they, one, understand the system, and two, pay attention to the system, right? That the attentive public are those that have an active interest. It doesn't mean they have political resources necessarily to truly impact the system, but they're absolutely up to date on the issues, they're aware of the issues, they follow the issues, they understand the issues, or believe they understand the issues, right? Okay, and then you have the masses, which is the masses, kind of the rest of the American public, the majority of the American public, that generally tends to have little interest on a day-to-day basis on politics and policy in America. Now, they may develop interest later when things influence them, and they may become attentive public, all right? All right, so types of opinions. If you get that, it talks about stable, it talks about fluid, all this kind of stuff. All it is certain issues Americans have tended to feel the same way for a long time. If you look at the death penalty, it's generally been a stable public opinion for quite some time, except maybe in the 60s or 70s, right, where there was an actual moratorium in some states for the death penalty, right? And maybe even the entire country for a short period. And then there's those that fluctuate a lot, the fluid ones, right? Like if you look at the presidential approval ratings fluctuate on a daily basis. Let's see this thing in Syria right now, right? Let's say it goes well. There are military intervention, it's quick, no American soldiers die, right? But Bashar al-Assad resigns, democratic regime comes to power in Syria, and they all frolic through the fields, holding hands, and the world is perfect. The president's approval ratings will go up. However, let's say the president orders a military strike, American troops get involved, it's costly in American lives, it's costly in American resources, it's long and drawn out, and the American public is fatigued from wars in Afghanistan, fatigued from wars in Iraq, and the president's approval ratings will go down, right? If the economy does well, presidential approval ratings go up. If the economy does poorly, approval ratings go down. If there's a scandal, the president's approval ratings go down. If there's a crisis and the president handles it well, they go up, right? So they fluctuate a lot. Gasoline prices go up, approval ratings go down, and vice versa, right? Gasoline prices go down, presidential approval ratings go up, all right? Those are fluid type, all right? And we're going to look at a whole bunch of different ones in class, all right? So, measuring public opinion. Here's the key, is you want to measure public opinion in a scientific manner, right? So let's talk about, like, one, we can look at elections, right? If the country overwhelmingly votes Democratic or overwhelmingly votes Republican, we know the American public is feeling Republican at one moment or Democratic at one moment. If they split their ticket and vote some D's and some R's to a variety of offices, we know the American public is feeling very moderate at that moment, right? So, elections, though, quite often just tell us how people voted, not why they voted. So you're going to have to go deeper to understand why they voted and to really gauge that public opinion, all right? So, the other thing you can do, badly, all right, straw polls. Straw polls are the opposite of scientific polls, all right? So think about that. They don't have all the procedures that make a scientific poll a good reflection of public opinion. So straw polls are quite often just very off the cuff. Hey, what do you guys think about this? You get a poll, well, the American public feels. You didn't follow the procedures of a good statistical kind of a measurement of public opinion, all right? So, we're really concerned about these scientific polls, all right? Now, there's a couple things. The universe, this is the population that you are measuring. So, if I wanted to know what Spanish Springs High School seniors felt regarding a school uniform, the universe I'm trying to explain are Spanish Springs High School seniors. I would not go ask freshmen to get a public opinion about seniors. If I wanted to know what do Nevadans think about the use of, say, solar energy, I wouldn't ask Californians, I would ask Nevadans, right? That's the universe I'm trying to explain. So, if I'm trying to say the American public feels, say Americans feel, the universe are Americans, right? But generally you don't have the resources to ask every single human being every single question, so you can say the American public or Nevadans or Californians or high school seniors feel, right? So what you do is you take a sample. And ideally, if you take a sample and you do it correctly, I can sample, say, now according to national polls, you need 1,500 to 2,000 to get a good poll. All right, again, Mr. Vecchione, Mr. Felker, Mr. Leach, our statisticians, right, may tell you a little bit different, but that's the general kind of a big picture look, all right? So, I want to explain a universe, so I will sample 1,500 people, right? And those 1,500 people are essentially speaking for whatever universe, in this case the American public, I'm trying to explain. But I have to get those 1,500 people with some certain procedures. One, everybody has to have a chance of being sampled, meaning random sampling, right? I have to avoid biased questions, right? And I have to conduct the poll in a manner that allows it to be random and that people that can be chosen. So one of the things, you can't simply call everybody. What if you call it breakfast? What if you call it lunch? What if you call it dinner? Do you need to call all three? Because if you call just at one, you're going to get a certain demographic. Remember, demographic are just simply age, race, gender, economics, religion, all that kind of stuff. Your numbers are going to be skewed if you only call at certain times, right? In the morning or the evening or, right? So generally what we have, they have these random dialing devices, which are computers that generate phone numbers that can randomly call or have the potential to call any phone in the country. That's random, right? You're going to have to manipulate the times a little bit, right? And again, you can't ask biased questions, because if you have a question that leads people to a conclusion or is biased, your data will be skewed, all right? And so sometimes we have to challenge polling in the sense that I want to see the questions. I want to know how you measured it, right? I want to know how many people you sampled, because I want to have a good poll if I'm going to use it to explain the American public opinion. Now, you'll often see the margin of error, right? It'll say 75% of the American public believe this. And then down in the little details, you'll see with the margin of error, plus or minus 4, right? What that means is if 70% felt a certain way and you had a margin of error of plus or minus 4, it technically could be 74%, 4 up, or 66%, 4 down. right? That it could be wrong, because you have to build in for some margin of error. You're not going to be perfect in your numbers unless you ask every single human in the country or every single person in your universe that you're trying to explain. All right? So the other thing is this, is you can lower the margin of error by increasing your sample size. But at some point, it doesn't matter how much you increase your sample size, you're only going to get down to a certain margin of error. And generally, if the questions are done right, if there's random sampling, and we get a margin of error of, say, 4%, we're generally happy with that. All right? You're not going to get much lower. And if you do, you know, good. And we like lower margins of error, but we know that at some point, you can't get below. And I'm not quite sure, like you can't get a 0. How about that? You cannot say with certainty 76% feel this way. There's going to be a margin of error, even if you increase the sample size. All right? Okay, but you have to get a certain sample size to get good data. All right, so we've gotten a good scientific poll. All right, now what do we do with them? All right, they're used by politicians. All right, politicians in office want to use them to see what their constituents feel. Now, your constituents are the people that vote for you, the people that elected you, the people you represent. So if we're from Nevada, we have Dean Heller and Senator Harry Reid, right? Senator Heller, Senator Reid are our U.S. senators, all right? Now, you may disagree with them politically. That's a D and an R there, right? But there are senators, technically. They represent Nevada. Their constituents are the state of Nevada, right? Just like the presidency, his constituency is the United States, right? So politicians will use polls to get an understanding of their constituents' opinions on certain things, right? All right, people running for office, not already in office, will use polls to see what people, one, want, and two, to see how people may vote. Would you vote for me, right? To get those kind of polls, all right? The American public sees polls quite often through the media in which we get informed about what the rest of the American public thinks on certain issues. How do they feel about same-sex marriage? How do they feel about using military intervention in Syria? Right? How do we feel about, the new healthcare law that's being implemented pretty quickly? Whatever it is, right? Taxes, no taxes, death penalty, right? It informs the American public about how our country feels on issues. All right. Now, also this other thing of exit polls. You can use polls to make predictions, right? You can predict who the winner is before the actual results are fully counted based on these exit polls. Now, here's the deal. In 2000, in the presidential election, the media famously said, based on exit polls, now an exit poll is, a polling station is where you go vote. So when you're exiting the polls, the places where you vote, there'll be people asking questions, trying to gather data, usually the media, because they want to be able to say, based on our exit polling, we say that so-and-so is the winner of the election, right? They want to scoop. They want to be the first. But in 2000, they famously messed up with exit polls. The media came out in Florida on the East Coast and said, Al Gore has won Florida. They had to come on fairly quickly and say, we don't know who won Florida. It's too close to call. Because they had garbage data. Those exit polls were not done in a scientific manner. You have to take the scientific traits of a good poll and apply those to an exit poll. So if you wanted to know how Nevada's 2nd Congressional District voted, you better go to random samples of the polling stations to get that data, to get those data to explain it. And even then, we're a little bit reluctant, right? All right. So, now, think about these. Your notes talk about the abuses of polls, all right? One of the things is, let's talk about an election, all right? If we have two candidates running for office, trying to win that election, and we see the poll show candidate A is winning by 80% of the vote based on the poll, and the candidate B is 20%, what quite often happens is this idea of a horse race mentality in which the media and everything focuses on the front runner and what they're about rather than a debate between two candidates telling you what they believe, right? So that candidate that has the most money, that candidate can get those polls quickly, high, has a great advantage because of this horse race mentality. Now, the critique of that is you don't have two candidates having a good substantive discussion, real issues, going at it. You basically have the media just focusing on the personality and the characteristics of this front runner. So we haven't had a true, this is the critique, a true debate between two candidates, right? Okay. Another critique is this idea of pandering to the whims of the public by candidates or by office holders. So the idea here is a politician who wants to get reelected or wants to get elected will go find out what the public feels about certain issues. And then in their speeches, in their actions, they will reflect what the majority of that public opinion says so they can be popular and win. Now, the critique of that is, one, you have to think this. Do we elect people to represent the view of their constituents, or do we elect them at times to make decisions that might not be popular with their constituents, but may be good for the country in the long run? Remember that whole discussion we had about, elected officials ideally had certain traits according to the framers, right? Is that a bad thing, pandering to the whims, or is it a reflection of what their constituents want, right? I guess the analogy would be, like, your parents sit there and say, look, I know it's not popular, but you're going to have to do this. You got to do more homework. You got to get a job. You have to study more, whatever it is, right? And it may not be popular with their constituents, but they're making you do that because they think it's good for you, right? Versus if they said, hey, son or daughter, what do you think about this, curfew time? And if you said, well, most kids feel that it should be 1 o'clock. And your parents said, well, I want to be popular with my kids, so it's 1 o'clock it is. Is that the right decision, or is just that a popular decision based on polling? Right? 1 second. Okay, so, and the other thing is this idea of early projections can, if they say in an exit poll, candidate A is winning by so much, what will happen is if a candidate is dominating an election in these exit polls, people may not turn out, one, because they think their candidate is going to easily win and he doesn't need them, or two, their candidate is losing so badly that they might as well not turn out. So polls can sometimes suppress voter turnout. And we see that generally the trend is elections that are close in polls have high turnout because people really think that their vote will matter. And elections in which it's skewed to one candidate have lower voter turnout because, right, they don't think they can influence it. Now, one other thing is this. Garbage in, garbage out. If you do not conduct a poll in a good scientific manner, the data means nothing. All right? That's what that is. Okay. Are we good on public opinion? Let's move on pretty quickly to, actually we have one more, right? The American public, according to these notes, generally has a hard time identifying key issues, key political figures, etc. All right? And we know that. I mean, I think maybe we can look into the framers and say, look, they understood that most Americans would not on a daily basis want to conduct politics. They would have other things, raising wonderful kids like you, going to work, that kind of thing, right? And so we probably shouldn't be surprised in a Republican system. However, the framers also knew that one of the key traits to a healthy and vibrant democracy is this idea of an educated citizenry, right? But here's what I think. Because people can identify certain features or trivia, it doesn't mean they don't have the ability to get informed quickly and to try to understand the issues quickly, all right? Okay, now let's move on to socialization. This political socialization, all this means is, how do you get your values? Where do you get your values, right? And so if you look at these big picture things, you get them from your family, you get them from schools, your religion, your race, the amount of money you make, the media, political elites talking in the media, right? And your gender. All of those are things that influence who you are as an ideology, you as an individual, right? Now, if you look at this, your family is the strongest agent of political socialization, meaning your family unit gives you the political ideology, the political values that you have, right? Okay. Now, schools. Now, generally, my job is not to say, kids, you should believe this or you should believe that. My job is to expose you to all the existing discussions that are happening, right? And so, my job, according to your notes, is to impart this basic civic duty, this idea that you should get informed, you should vote, you should participate, right? That's what I'm here for. Oh, there's the bell. All right, so, now your religion, right? If we take religion,
Attention all girls golf. You are meeting in the big gym today. Girls golf meeting in the big gym today.
Protestants.
Varsity boys soccer has been canceled. Varsity boys soccer has been canceled.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Protestants, so if we take these religions, like, and right now we have Protestants, Catholics, and Judaism, right? Protestants tend to be, and these are stereotypes, the most conservative. All right, evangelical Protestant Christians tend to be the most conservative on social issues, abortion, same-sex marriage, right? That kind of thing. Religion in schools, separation of church and state, that kind of thing, all right? Now, Catholics have traditionally been a little bit more liberal, right? What you see in your data is, but on certain issues, again, Catholics tend to be conservative. On issues like same-sex marriage, gay marriage, or same issue, right? Abortion, Catholics, if they're following Catholicism, they tend to be a little bit more conservative. However, on a lot of other issues like welfare and the role of government, they tend to be, or can be, right? These are stereotypes, a little bit more liberal, right? So if we have to choose, Protestants tend to be a little more conservative than Catholics, right? And Catholics, like, look at this data right here, right? A majority of Catholics voted for Clinton, but Bush won the Catholic vote in 2004. And in 2008, a majority of Catholics voted for Obama. So they're somewhere in the middle, right? Whereas Protestants tend to be a little bit more to the right. Tend to be, right? These are all stereotypes. All right, now, Judaism. The Jewish vote tends to be fairly strong for the Democratic Party. All right, that's the trend. So, now race. Now look at this really quickly. Whites tend to be more conservative than blacks, who tend to be more conservative than Hispanics. All right. Now, Asians traditionally in the last few elections, 2000, 2004, 2008, have generally been Democratic. All right. So your race matters. If, like, the idea here is, if you are born into a Protestant family that is white, you have the chance of being more conservative than if you're born into a Jewish family who is black, right? Does that make sense? That impacts your ideology. Now, income. It generally tends to be those that make more money tend to be more conservative. We're going to dive into why later. And those with lower incomes tend to be more liberal and supportive of the Democratic Party. All right? Now, the mass media. The mass media, and I can't say this enough, the media influences us. All right? As you will see in the next unit, we tend to watch the media that we already agree with. All right? So if you're in a conservative house, you're probably watching conservative media. If you're in a liberal house, you're probably watching liberal media. Now, if you're in a moderate house, maybe you're watching something in the middle or both sides. Right? The media influences, it sets the agenda. It talks about, excuse me, it talks about what we're going to talk about. Does that make sense? The media is strong in setting the agenda. Now, gender. All right? Let's think about this now. Men tend to vote more conservative than women. All right? That's that. We'll look in the details. You can look at those details, right? And now finally, this concept of cross pressure. If you take, right, a little race, a little gender, a little income, a little religion. Also, hey, another thing, region. Man, region's not on here. Where you are born is incredibly important. If you're born in the South, you're probably going to be more conservative than if you're born on the coast. If you're born in the Great Plains, you're probably going to be more conservative than you would be if you were born around the Great Lakes, all right? Where you are born also matters. Now, if we take all those things, mix them up, shake it, right? That's you politically. That's the American public politically. And so look at this idea of cross-pressure, right? Cross-pressure means, you know, the race is conflicting with the gender, which is conflicting with the religion, etc. All of those things, when you take this moment and go to vote, and you're a white woman who's poor, who's Jewish, who's born in the South, that's cross-pressure. You take all those agents of socialization and you experience cross-pressure. All right? Okay. Hey, that's it. All right? Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow. Go Giants.